My son took my car keys on a Tuesday morning. He did it while I was making toast. No argument. No warning. He simply lifted the small brass hook beside the back door, took the keys to my Buick, and slipped them into his coat pocket. I watched him do it. He knew I was watching. Neither of us said anything for several seconds. Then I turned off the toaster. "Paul?" He looked at me. "Dad?" "Put them back." He did not. Instead, my 56-year-old son said the sentence every older parent eventually discovers they hate. "We're only doing this because we love you." That was when I knew my morning was ruined. My name is Harold Bennett. I was 80 years old that Tuesday. I had driven for 62 years. I had never lost my license. Never been arrested. Never hit another car. My last speeding ticket had been in 1989, and even then I maintained the hill was partly responsible. I knew I was slower than I used to be. I did not drive at night unless I had to. I avoided the interstate in heavy rain. I left more space at junctions. Age had changed the way I drove. It had not erased my ability to do it. Or so I believed. Paul sat at my kitchen table. His older sister, Karen, was already there. That should have warned me. My children did not usually arrive together before 9 in the morning unless someone had died or furniture needed moving. Karen was 58. She worked in a school office, had 2 grown children, and possessed the irritating ability to make concern sound like a meeting agenda. She folded her hands. "Dad, sit down." "I am not sitting down while my car is being stolen." Paul sighed. "Nobody is stealing your car. You have the keys. Temporarily." The difference between temporarily stealing something and permanently stealing it is apparently scheduling. Karen closed her eyes. "Can we please not do this? You came to my house to take my keys. What version of this did you think we were going to do?" Paul leaned forward. "We're worried about your driving." "Why?" "You've had some close calls." "What close calls?" Karen looked at Paul. "I noticed." People often think the elderly stop noticing when younger people exchange looks. We notice. We simply become too tired to ask every time. That morning, I asked. "What?" Karen said. "Last month you backed into the hedge." "My own hedge." "You didn't notice." "I noticed when branches appeared in the mirror." Paul said. "And you missed the turn to Karen's house." I was talking. "You've been going to her house for 30 years. People can miss turns after 30 years. You drove through that stop sign near the pharmacy." I stopped. "That is not what happened." Karen was in the car. Karen looked uncomfortable. I turned to her. "Tell him what happened." She hesitated. "Dad?" "Tell him." The sign was partly covered by a delivery truck. Paul stared at her. "You didn't tell me that." "I told you he went through it." "That is different." "Yes." It was my turn to exchange a look. I exchanged it with myself because my wife had been dead 4 years. Margaret would have enjoyed that argument. She enjoyed most arguments once she had decided they were not hers. I walked to the table. Have either of you spoken to my doctor? Another look. This one was worse. Have you? Paul said. We spoke to Dr. Evans's office. My chest tightened. About me? Yes. Without me. We're listed as family contacts. That does not make you my board of directors. Karen said. They couldn't tell us anything private. Then what exactly did you accomplish? We told them what we were seeing. I stared at my children. What are you seeing? That question changed the room. Until then, we had been arguing about driving. Suddenly I understood we were arguing about me. Paul rubbed his forehead. You forget things. I have forgotten things since 1954. You repeat stories. So do you. I'm 56. That has not improved them. Karen almost smiled. Paul did not. You left the stove on in January. I went quiet. That one was true. I had put soup on low heat. Then my neighbor, Frank, came over because his garage door had jammed. We spent 40 minutes fixing it. When I returned, the soup had burned. No fire. No damage. Just a ruined saucepan and a house that smelled like punishment. Margaret once burned an entire chicken while talking to her sister on the telephone. Nobody took away her oven. But Margaret had been 53. I was 80. And that morning, I realized the same mistake changes meaning depending on how gray your hair is. Karen softened her voice. We want you evaluated. For what? Just memory. There is no such thing as just memory when you are 80. A sore knee is a sore knee. A forgotten name becomes evidence. I looked at the keys in Paul's pocket. And until then? We drive you. There it was. The new arrangement. Announced as though I had already agreed. I asked. What happens Thursday? Paul frowned. What's Thursday? That hurt more than the keys. Every Thursday for 37 years, I had gone to breakfast at Miller's Cafe. Same booth if it was free. 7:30. At first there were 8 of us. Men from the old municipal bus depot. Drivers. Mechanics. Dispatchers. Men who knew what diesel smelled like in winter and why no route ever ran according to the timetable once schools closed for snow. I had driven city buses for 34 years. Retired at 63. Thursday breakfast outlasted the depot. Outlasted retirement. Outlasted 2 marriages. 3 cancers. A bankruptcy. 1 second marriage nobody approved of. And 6 funerals. Now there were 3 of us. Me. Frank Doyle. And Leonard Pike. Sometimes only 2. Leonard's arthritis was bad. Frank's wife had begun needing more help in the mornings. But Thursday was Thursday. Paul had forgotten. Breakfast, I said. Karen remembered. Oh. Paul said. I'll take you. At 7:30? Yes. You start work at 8. I can go in late. I looked at him. Every Thursday? His hesitation lasted less than a second. It was enough. I reached for my toast. It was cold. I ate it anyway. The next day, Karen drove me to Dr. Evans. I would like to say I behaved graciously. I did not. I criticized her route, her parking, her following distance. At one point she said, "Dad, are you trying to prove I shouldn't drive either?" Yes. She laughed. I did not. Dr. Evans had been my doctor for 14 years. He was 46. Which meant I owned neckties older than his medical degree. He listened. Asked questions. Gave me a cognitive screening test. Date. Place. Words to remember. A clock to draw. I disliked every minute of it. Not because it was difficult. Because suddenly ordinary answers felt like auditions for my own life. At the end, Dr. Evans took off his glasses. "You did well." Karen visibly relaxed. I did not. What does well mean? It means I don't see evidence here of significant cognitive impairment. I turned toward Karen. She held up a hand. Don't. I turned back. May I drive? Dr. Evans smiled carefully. Doctors become very skilled at careful smiles. This test doesn't determine driving fitness. Of course it didn't. Nothing useful is ever that simple. He continued. If there are concerns, I'd recommend an occupational driving assessment. Fine. Karen looked at me. Dad? Fine. I looked at Dr. Evans. Schedule it. He nodded. Then he said, "One more thing." I hate one more thing. Nothing good has ever begun with one more thing. Dr. Evans looked at Karen. Could I speak with Harold alone? That surprised both of us. Karen left. Dr. Evans waited until the door closed. Then he said, "How are you doing without Margaret?" 4 years. My wife had been dead 4 years. And somehow one direct question could still make the room smaller. I'm doing. That isn't what I asked. It's what I answered. He waited. I disliked that too. Good doctors know silence makes old men confess. I looked at my hands. The house is quiet. He nodded. I continued. I eat. I sleep. I see the children. I go to breakfast on Thursdays. Anything else? That seems like enough administration. Harold. I sighed. No. There. The truth. I had stopped bowling after Margaret died because we had gone together. Stopped attending the community theater because she bought the tickets. Stopped going to the lake because she liked it more than I did, and without her I discovered I had apparently spent 30 years pretending mosquitoes were charming. Thursday breakfast remained. And driving. Driving remained because it was mine. Dr. Evans said, "Losing independence can be frightening." I have not lost it. I know. Then tell my children. He smiled. That part is not medical. Thursday morning, Paul arrived at 7:15. He was wearing work clothes. His phone rang twice before we left my street. He rejected both calls. I said, "You can answer." "No. It might be work." "It is." "Then answer it." "I'm taking you to breakfast." The way he said it made breakfast sound like chemotherapy. Miller's Cafe had not changed much since 1984. That was part of its charm. Also part of its plumbing problem. Frank was already in the booth. Leonard was not. Frank looked at Paul. "Who's your chauffeur?" "My jailer." Paul sighed. Frank laughed so hard he coughed. He was 82. Thin as a broom handle and still wore his old bus depot cap despite the depot having been demolished 12 years earlier. Paul stayed for coffee. Then work called again. He stood. "I'll be back at 9. I can get home." "How?" Frank said. "No." I turned to him. "What?" "My license expired." "When?" "November." I stared. "You have been coming here every Thursday." "My daughter drives me." "You never said." Frank shrugged. "You never asked." Paul looked at me. I disliked whatever lesson the universe was attempting. After he left, I asked, "Why didn't you renew?" Frank stirred his coffee. Eyes. "You had surgery. Didn't help enough." "Why didn't you tell us?" Frank looked up. "Because Leonard would spend 6 months telling me how much better he drives." I laughed. Then I realized Leonard was still missing. "Where is he?" Frank's smile vanished. "Hospital." "What?" "His daughter called last night." "He fell." "Bad?" "Hip." The booth felt too large. 3 men had become 2. Now 2 had become 1.5 depending on how you counted Frank's eyesight. I looked at the empty seat. Margaret used to tell me I treated routines like legal contracts. She was right. I believed if you kept showing up, life had to keep some part of the agreement. Thursday breakfast existed. Therefore we existed. That morning, I saw how poor the logic was. On Friday, I received a letter from the Department of Motor Vehicles. I almost threw it away. Official envelopes rarely improve a morning. I opened it. Then read it twice. It acknowledged a request for medical review of my driving privileges. A request I had not made. My doctor had not made it. The letter said a concerned family member had submitted the report. I called Paul. He did not answer. I called Karen. She answered. "Did you report me to the DMV?" Silence. That family silence again. Karen. "Yes." I sat down. "Before the doctor?" "Yes." "Before asking me to take an assessment?" "Yes." Before taking my keys. A pause. Yes. So the decision had already been made. No. Don't insult me. Dad, reporting concerns isn't the same as taking your license. You reported me without telling me. We thought if we told you, you'd refuse. I did refuse. And then I agreed. You didn't know that when we filed it. Exactly. They had not given me the opportunity. I asked. What did you tell them? The incidents. The hedge? Yes. The missed turn? Yes. The stop sign? Yes. Did you mention the delivery truck blocked it? Karen did not answer. I hung up. That evening, Paul arrived with groceries. I did not let him unpack them. I put the bags on the porch. Take them. Dad? I can buy groceries. You don't have a car. I have legs. The store is 2 miles away. Then I have a telephone. I don't need you stocking my refrigerator like I'm a cabin before winter. Paul's face changed. He looked hurt. Good. I wanted him hurt. I am not proud of that. People like to imagine age brings patience. Sometimes it only means your anger has more history behind it. Paul said. Karen told me about the letter. I assume she left out the delivery truck again. Dad? Give me my keys. He shook his head. No. I stared at him. Then leave. Dad? Leave. He did. He took the groceries. And my keys. Saturday morning, I walked to the grocery store. I made it 1 mile before admitting this was stupid. Pride makes excellent fuel until your knees become involved. I stopped at a bus shelter. There was a route map. I had helped design an earlier version of that route 30 years before. For several minutes, I stared at it. Then I laughed. A retired bus driver had forgotten the city still had buses. I boarded Route 14. The driver looked about 30. I told him where I was going. He said, I know. Apparently passengers no longer had to explain routes to drivers. Progress. I sat near the front. Watched the city pass. I had driven thousands of people along those streets. Workers half asleep. Children with school bags. Nurses ending night shifts. People carrying groceries. People without cars. I had spent my career believing public transport gave people independence. Yet the first time I needed it, I treated it like evidence I had lost mine. That bothered me. So did the fact that the bus got me to the store 12 minutes faster than my walk would have. I bought groceries. Too many. Another error. On the return trip, I sat beside a woman named Evelyn. I know her name because within 3 stops she told me her name, her age, her daughter's profession, and the reason she no longer trusted packaged tomatoes. She was 77. Widowed. No longer drove because arthritis in her hands made steering painful. She took the bus everywhere. Library. Church. Hairdresser. Her sister's apartment. She noticed me looking at the groceries. First time? On a bus? With bags. Yes. You bought too much. I had reached that conclusion. She pointed to a small folding trolley beside her. Get one of these. I'm not 90. Evelyn looked at me. Then carry your potatoes. I liked her immediately. The following Tuesday, I had my driving assessment. Paul offered to take me. I took the bus. Petty? Yes. Satisfying? Also yes. The evaluator was a woman named Denise. She explained the process. Vision. Reaction. Road signs. Then driving. She had the voice of someone who had explained the same thing 8,000 times and still managed not to sound annoyed. I passed the written parts. Then we drove. Not my Buick. A training vehicle. I hated it. The mirrors were wrong. The seat was wrong. The indicator sounded like an impatient metronome. But I drove. 37 minutes later, we returned. Denise sat beside me with a clipboard. I waited. Well? You're cautious. That sounds good. Mostly. There is mostly again. Nobody over 80 wants mostly attached to a skill. She told me my lane position was good. My judgment at intersections was good. My speed control was good. My neck rotation was limited. I compensated with mirrors, but not consistently enough. My reaction time was within an acceptable range but slower than average. Then she said, I would recommend continued daytime driving with some restrictions. I almost laughed. Meaning? Avoid night driving. Avoid high-speed roads during poor weather. Consider a larger rearview mirror and blind spot aids. I already avoid night driving. That's good judgment. And I can keep my license? Based on today, yes. I should have felt victorious. I did. For approximately 11 seconds. Then Denise added, you should also reassess regularly. Because I'm 80. Because driving ability changes. At 80. At every age. She smiled. You just have less room to pretend it doesn't. I thought about that on the bus home. I had passed. My children had been wrong to take my keys. Wrong to report me without telling me. But they had not imagined every concern. That was inconvenient. I called Paul. I passed. Silence. Then. That's great. His voice was sincere. I had been hoping for disappointment. It would have made him easier to resent. Bring my keys. I'm at work. After. Okay. Then he said, Dad? What? I'm glad. I hung up before that could affect me. He arrived at 6. My keys were in his hand. He placed them on the kitchen table. Not the hook. The table. I noticed. Why there? What? The keys. I don't know. Put them back. He looked at me. Then picked them up and hung them on the brass hook. It mattered. More than it should have. The hook had been Margaret's idea. Before it, I lost my keys constantly. At 42, this was considered absent-minded. At 80, apparently it would become an assessment. Paul sat. I'm sorry. For what part? He sighed. All of it. That's lazy. What? If you are apologizing, be specific. He looked annoyed. Good. Specificity was working. Paul leaned back. I'm sorry I took your keys without asking. Good. I'm sorry we reported you before talking to you properly. Better. I'm sorry I treated being worried as permission. That one stopped me. I looked at him. Where did you get that? Karen. Of course. No. Her therapist. I laughed. Somewhere professional had finally become useful. Then I asked Paul. What were you afraid would happen? He looked at the keys. You'd hurt someone. Fair. Or yourself. Also fair. He kept looking at the hook. Then said. Or Mom would be right. I frowned. What does that mean? Paul immediately looked as though he wanted the sentence back. Paul? He rubbed his face. She asked me to watch you. The room went quiet. Margaret had been dead 4 years. And once again she had entered an argument without being invited. When? Near the end. Watch me how? Paul swallowed. She said you'd pretend everything was fine. I looked away. That sounded like Margaret. Annoyingly. She said after she was gone, you'd stop doing things one by one and tell everybody you preferred it that way. I did not answer. Paul continued. She said you'd hate being helped. She was correct about that. And she said I was supposed to make sure you didn't disappear inside that house. That hurt. Because 4 years after Margaret died, I had done almost exactly what she predicted. I had not disappeared. Not entirely. But my world had become smaller in ways I described as preference. I said. That still didn't give you the right to take my keys. I know. Your mother asked you to watch me. Not run me. I know. Did Karen know? Yes. Wonderful. Anybody else receive instructions from my dying wife? Paul smiled sadly. Probably the postman. Margaret would have laughed. I drove Thursday. Daylight. Clear weather. No interstate. Denise would have been proud. I picked up Frank. That felt good. For years, Frank had met me at Miller's. Now I drove to him. His daughter stood at the door as he came outside. She looked at me suspiciously. "Your license is valid?" Frank said. "Don't start." I held up my assessment paperwork. She smiled. "Good." I almost told her I had survived stricter inspectors than her. Then remembered she was the one making sure Frank got breakfast every Thursday. I thanked her instead. At Miller's, the booth was empty. Leonard was still in rehabilitation. Frank and I ordered. Then he said, "Leonard wants to come next week. He can't walk. He can sit. How do we get him here?" Frank shrugged. "His daughter says wheelchair van." I stared at the empty seat. Then something occurred to me. What if we don't? Don't what? Bring him here. Frank frowned. "You want to leave him out?" "No." "What if breakfast goes to him?" Frank stared. Then smiled. The following Thursday, Miller's packed 3 breakfasts into containers. I drove Frank to the rehabilitation center. We found Leonard in a chair by the window. He was 83. He looked smaller than he had 2 weeks earlier. He saw us. Then saw the cafe bags. "You idiots." Frank hugged him. I pretended to organize coffee. Old men are very skilled at creating administrative work whenever emotions become visible. We ate beside the window. Leonard complained about hospital eggs. Frank complained about his daughter hiding salt. I complained about my children taking my keys. Leonard looked at me. "They gave them back?" "Yes." "Then stop whining." I stared. "You've been in hospital 14 days and already become unbearable." "I was unbearable before." Frank nodded. "That is true." We laughed. For half an hour, the room stopped being a rehabilitation room. It became Booth 6 at Miller's. Same men. Different chairs. That distinction would become important later. A month passed. I kept driving. Carefully. I installed the larger mirror Denise recommended. Paul did not install it. I did. Mostly because I wanted him to know I still knew which end of a screwdriver belonged in my hand. I also kept taking the bus. That surprised everyone. Including me. I bought the folding shopping trolley. Evelyn was correct. I never told her. Some dignity must survive. Then one Thursday, Paul called before breakfast. His voice was different. "Dad, don't leave yet." "Why?" "I'm coming over." "For what?" "I need to show you something." Again. Nothing good begins with that sentence either. He arrived carrying a small cardboard box. Not large. Shoebox size. He put it on the table. "What is that?" "Mom's." I stared at him. 4 years after Margaret died, we still had objects capable of making an ordinary room stop behaving normally. Where was it? My garage. Why? You gave me boxes after we cleared the sewing room. I thought they were old patterns. They mostly were. He opened the lid. Inside were envelopes. Not dozens. 5. Each had a name. Karen, Paul, Lucy, Mark, and Harold. Lucy and Mark were our grandchildren. Margaret had written letters before she died. Nobody knew. Paul said, "I haven't opened yours." "Have you opened yours?" "Yes." "What did she say?" "That I worry like her." She was correct. She said not to make that your problem. I looked at him. Margaret was becoming annoyingly efficient from beyond the grave. I took my envelope. My name was in her handwriting. She had always written my name too large. Even on birthday cards. As though there were a risk I would mistake my own mail. I opened it after Paul left. Alone. The first line said, "Harold, if you are reading this, then either Paul finally cleaned his garage or somebody is looking for the sewing scissors." I laughed. Out loud. First time that morning. Then I kept reading. Margaret wrote that she worried about me. Not my memory. Not my driving. My stubbornness. Which was offensive because she had married me knowing the specifications. She wrote, "You have spent your whole life being useful. It is how you understand yourself. You drove people where they needed to go. You fixed what broke. You carried what was heavy." I paused. When your body makes some of those things harder, I know exactly what you will do. You will call the world unreasonable. I laughed again. Then I stopped. Because the next part was harder. You must not confuse being needed with being loved. I read it twice. Then a third time. Margaret continued, "Our children do not love you because you can drive them somewhere. They do not love you because you can repair a tap or carry a suitcase. They will still love you when you need the ride." I put the letter down. I was angry. At Margaret. At myself. At the fact that dead people get the last word far too often. Then I read the final page. Let them help you. Not with everything. You would be unbearable. But sometimes. And make sure helping goes both ways. If you cannot drive somebody, call them. If you cannot lift something, sit with the person who is tired from lifting it. Useful changes shape, Harold. Then the last sentence. Please do not spend the rest of your life proving you can manage without me. I cried. Not dramatically. No collapse. No speech. I sat at my kitchen table with one hand over my eyes and cried because my wife had known exactly what I would become without her. And because knowing did not mean she could prevent it. I missed breakfast that Thursday. Frank called at 9. "Where are you?" "Home." "You sick?" "No." "Then why aren't you here?" I looked at Margaret's letter. I found a note. From who? Margaret. Frank became quiet. He had known her 40 years. Then he said, "She's still telling you what to do?" "Yes." "Good." "Why good?" "Somebody should." I hung up on him. Some traditions matter. That afternoon, I drove to Karen's house. I had not warned her. This was partly because I wanted to talk, and partly because I wanted her to see I had arrived in my own car. Growth is uneven. She opened the door. "What happened?" "Nothing happened." "You never come over at 3. "I am branching out." We sat in her living room. I handed her Margaret's envelope addressed to her. Karen stared. "Where did this come from?" "Paul's garage." She laughed. Mom knew. Apparently she knew everything except how to make Paul clean. Karen opened her letter. I looked away. 10 minutes later, she was crying. I waited. Then she said, "She told me to stop keeping score." "Of what?" "Everything." Sounds like her. Karen wiped her face. She said I keep track of who calls, who visits, who helps, who doesn't. She said I turn love into bookkeeping when I'm tired. I sat quietly. Then asked, "Were you tired?" Karen looked at me. "What?" "When you reported me." Her face changed. She leaned back. "Yes." I waited. For once, I did not help her explain. She continued. "I was angry." "At me?" "Yes." That surprised me. "Why?" Karen looked at the letter. "Because Paul gets to worry about you." "That makes no sense." "It does to me." She took a breath. "Paul calls you every morning. He checks the furnace. He fixes things. And everybody thinks he is the one looking after Dad. He does a lot." "I know." "That isn't what I mean." Karen looked toward the window. "Who took Mom to most of her appointments?" I went quiet. "You." "Who handled the insurance forms?" "You." "Who stayed with her when you went home to sleep?" "You." Karen nodded. "And after she died, Paul became the person who did things." "Because he lives closer." "I know that." "I am not blaming him. I am telling you I got tired of being the one who worried quietly." The words landed harder than I expected. Karen continued. "When you left the stove on, Paul said it was probably nothing. When you missed the turn, he laughed. When you went through the stop sign, I was sitting next to you." "Yes, the truck blocked part of it." "But Dad, I was scared." I looked at her. "Not my daughter, the administrator. Not the woman who filed the report. My daughter. Who had sat beside her dying mother. Who had already lost one parent. And for whom my age was not an abstract number. It was a countdown she could not see." I said, You still should have told me. I know. You should have included the truck. I know. And if you ever report me to a government agency again, I will haunt you while alive. Karen laughed through tears. That doesn't make sense. You understood it. Then I said something I had not planned. I'm sorry. Karen blinked. For what? For letting you worry quietly. She cried again. I was beginning to regret the entire visit. Then she hugged me. I hugged her back. A week later, Leonard came home. Not to his old house. His daughter had converted the ground floor of her home so he could stay with her during recovery. Leonard hated it. Which meant he was recovering normally. Frank and I visited. Leonard's daughter, Melissa, made coffee. Leonard criticized the strength. She ignored him. Then he said, "I'm never driving again." I looked at him. Doctor? No. Then why? I don't want to. That answer irritated me. You fought your daughter for 2 years about giving it up. I know. You said buses were unreliable. They are. You said taxis were expensive. They are. You said your car was freedom. Leonard looked at me. Then he said, I was wrong. I almost checked him for fever. Leonard Pike had been wrong 3 times since 1971. He remembered each one. What changed? He looked toward Melissa in the kitchen. When I fell, I was alone for 20 minutes. Felt like 2 hours. I kept thinking I had to get up because I had things to do. Then I realized none of the things mattered if I couldn't call somebody. Frank said. That is very philosophical for a man who complains about coffee. Leonard ignored him. I thought independence meant nobody had to wait for me. Now I think it means I get a say in what help looks like. I stared at him. Did Melissa teach you that? No. The physical therapist. Everybody has a therapist now. Frank said. You need one. I need better friends. But Leonard's sentence followed me home. A say in what help looks like. That was what I had wanted from Paul and Karen. Not a promise that I would never need them. Not proof that I could do everything alone. A say. And then I had to admit something worse. I had not always given Margaret that either. 2 years before she died, Margaret stopped driving at night. Her eyes were poor in darkness. She knew it. I knew it. We agreed. Then one afternoon she dented the passenger door in a supermarket car park. Nobody was hurt. She misjudged a concrete post. I spent the next month driving everywhere. Without asking. Margaret complained. I told her I was helping. She said, "You're hovering." I told her not to be ridiculous. Eventually she drove again. Daytime. Carefully. Exactly as I was doing now. I had forgotten the argument. Or perhaps I had remembered only my side. That is one of the advantages of surviving your spouse. You become the historian. It is also the danger. That evening, I took Margaret's letter from the drawer. I read. Let them help you. Then. Make sure helping goes both ways. I understood the first part. The second took longer. Paul came over the next Sunday to fix my back gate. The hinge was loose. I could have fixed it. I almost did before he arrived. Then decided not to. This was an act of restraint greater than my children will ever appreciate. Paul worked for 20 minutes. I stood nearby. He looked at me. You're hovering. I laughed so suddenly he nearly dropped the wrench. What? Nothing. Margaret had won again. When he finished, I said, "Do you want lunch?" I should get home. Okay. He hesitated. That's it? What? You usually guilt me. I do not. You say okay in a voice that means you may die before I return. I was offended by the accuracy. I have no idea what you mean. Paul smiled. Then I said, "Go home." He looked almost suspicious. Seriously. I'll see you Thursday. What's Thursday? I stared. He laughed. I'm kidding. I told him that joke was not yet safe. Over the next few months, Thursday breakfast changed. Not ended. Changed. Leonard did not return to Miller's regularly. So every second Thursday, we went to him. Sometimes Frank's daughter drove. Sometimes I did. Once we all took the bus because my Buick needed a new alternator. Frank complained the entire way. He used to repair buses. Apparently knowledge does not create gratitude. Then other people began joining us. First Earl, another retired driver we had not seen in years. Then Leonard's neighbor, Sam. Then Evelyn from Route 14. I invited her after meeting her on the bus 3 more times. Frank objected because Thursday breakfast had historically been manned from the depot. Evelyn told him history had survived worse. Frank liked her immediately. By autumn, Thursday breakfast had become 7 people. Only 2 had worked at the depot. Margaret would have approved. She spent 37 years telling us we talked about buses too much. Then, in November, something happened that I had been pretending would not happen. I scared myself while driving. Not an accident. Nobody was hurt. That matters. I was leaving Miller's. Bright afternoon. Dry roads. I turned left onto Pine Street. A cyclist came from behind on my left. I did not see him immediately. He was not close enough for a collision. He braked. I braked. He raised a hand in frustration. Then rode away. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds. For the rest of the afternoon, I felt those 3 seconds. I had checked my mirror. I believed I had checked properly. but I had not seen him. When I got home, the Buick remained in the driveway. I sat behind the wheel for 10 minutes after turning off the engine. Then I did something I had not expected to do. I called Paul. "Can you come over?" "What happened?" "Nothing." "Dad?" "Nobody was hurt." He arrived in 12 minutes. Karen arrived 10 minutes after him because Paul called her. I considered being angry, then decided I was tired. We sat at the kitchen table. The keys were on the hook. I told them what happened. Nobody interrupted. That was new. When I finished, Paul asked, "What do you want to do?" 6 months earlier, he would have told me. This time he asked. That mattered too. I said, "I don't know." Karen said, "That's okay." I looked at the keys. Then at Margaret's letter on the counter. Useful changes shape. I hated that sentence. Which meant I probably needed it. I scheduled another assessment myself. Nobody suggested it. I called Denise. She remembered me. Possibly because I had argued with the indicator sound for 10 minutes. We repeated the test. I still did well. But not as well. My neck mobility had worsened. Reaction time slightly slower. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing that required the state to immediately remove my license. Denise said I could continue with tighter restrictions. Short local trips. Good weather. Familiar routes. No busy intersections where possible. I listened. Then asked, "If I were your father, what would you tell me?" Denise leaned back. "I wouldn't tell you what to do." That is an evasive answer. It is an honest one. She continued, "I would ask what driving gives you. Then I'd ask which parts of that you can keep without taking more risk than you want." What did driving give me? I thought the answer was freedom. But freedom was too large a word. Driving gave me Thursday breakfast. Groceries when I wanted them. The cemetery when I wanted to visit Margaret. The ability to leave a room without negotiating a ride home. It gave me spontaneity. Privacy. Usefulness. Control. And maybe one more thing. It let me pretend I was still the man I had been at 60. That was harder to admit. I drove home carefully. Parked the Buick. Hung the keys on Margaret's hook. Then left them there for 5 days. Nobody knew. Paul called. Karen visited. I did not tell them I had stopped driving. I wanted to know what my life looked like without announcing a decision first. Monday, I took the bus to the library. Tuesday, I walked to the barber. Wednesday, Karen called and asked if I wanted anything from the store. My first instinct was no. Then Margaret's letter appeared in my head like an unwanted advertisement. Let them help you. I asked for milk. One item. I felt ridiculous. Karen brought milk. She did not bring 6 bags of emergency supplies. Progress on both sides. Thursday, I had a problem. Breakfast. I could drive. Legally. Carefully. The weather was clear. Miller's was familiar. I stood beside the hook. My keys were there. I reached for them. Then stopped. Not because Paul had taken them. Not because Karen had reported me. Not because a doctor or evaluator had forbidden me. Because I did not want the risk that morning. That difference was everything. I called Frank. "How are you getting there?" "My daughter." "Can she pick me up?" Silence. Then Frank said, "Who are you and what have you done with Harold?" "Ask her." "Are you sick?" Frank. "Fine." She picked me up. Nobody died. Nobody's independence collapsed. Breakfast tasted exactly the same. That was almost disappointing. I did not give up driving that week. Or that month. I drove less. Not because my children wanted me to. Because I began choosing which trips mattered enough to drive myself. I drove to Margaret's grave. I drove to Leonard's daughter's house once. I drove to the hardware store on quiet mornings. For everything else, I walked, took the bus, accepted rides or occasionally used a car service. At first, I thought this was surrender. Then I realized surrender feels different. This felt like editing. Keeping what still worked. Removing what did not. The way Margaret used to shorten recipes after deciding half the instructions were unnecessary. The following spring, I sold a Buick. That surprised everybody. Including the Buick. It had been in my driveway 11 years. Margaret chose the color. Dark blue. She called it dignified. I called it difficult to find in a car park. A young couple bought it. They had a baby. The husband checked the engine. The wife checked whether the pushchair fit in the boot. Margaret would have approved of her priorities. When they drove away, Paul was standing beside me. I had asked him to come. Not because I needed help with the sale. Because I did not want to watch the car leave alone. That may have been the biggest change. Paul said, "You okay?" "No." He nodded. We watched the Buick turn at the end of the street. Then disappear. I cried. Not because I loved the car. I liked it. Cars are machines. But that machine contained versions of my life. Margaret beside me complaining about the radio. Grandchildren asleep in the back. Thursday breakfasts. Hospital visits. Christmas presents in the boot. The last drive Margaret and I took together. I had not realized how much memory could attach itself to metal. Paul put a hand on my shoulder. This time, I did not tell him I was fine. 2 days later, he drove me to the cemetery. My request. I had always gone alone. I thought visiting Margaret was private. Maybe it was. But grief had become private enough. Paul waited near the car while I stood beside her grave. I brought the letter. I did not read it. I knew the important parts. I said, "Well, you got your way." No answer. Not all of it. Still nothing. I gave up the car. A breeze moved through the trees. People who tell stories would call that a sign. Margaret would call it weather. I smiled. Then I said, "I'm still angry you were right." That was the closest thing to a prayer I had managed in months. When I returned to the car, Paul opened the passenger door. I stared at him. "What?" "You can stop doing that." "Doing what?" "Opening doors." He smiled. "Okay." Then closed it again. I opened it myself. A say in what help looks like. A year has passed. I am 81. Still in my house. That detail matters because 6 months after selling the Buick, both children asked whether I wanted to consider moving somewhere smaller. They asked. Notice the progress. I said no. They accepted it. Mostly. Karen sends me listings occasionally. I send her houses in Alaska. We have reached balance. Thursday breakfast is still going. It no longer happens every Thursday at Miller's. That used to bother me. Now it happens wherever we can make it happen. Miller's. Leonard's. Evelyn's building. Once in the hospital cafeteria when Frank had a procedure. We have learned the table is less important than who sits around it. Leonard walks with a cane. Frank still cannot drive. Evelyn still criticizes my grocery choices. She was correct about the trolley. She is wrong about tomatoes. Paul and Karen come to breakfast occasionally. This was not my idea. Frank invited them. He said if they were going to interfere in my life, they should at least buy coffee. Paul gets on well with Leonard. Karen and Evelyn have become dangerous together. They once spent 40 minutes discussing whether I needed new shoes. I left the table. They continued. Margaret's letter remains in my kitchen drawer. Not framed. I considered framing it. Then decided Margaret would find that dramatic. I read it less now. I think that is healthy. For months, I treated it like instructions. Then I realized even Margaret would not expect me to obey her forever. Probably. The brass key hook is still beside the back door. It no longer holds car keys. For a while, that empty hook bothered me. It looked like evidence. Something removed. Then one day I hung my bus pass there. Paul saw it. He laughed. Really? What? Mom's key hook. It holds transportation. That is your argument? It is my house. He nodded. Fair. I have thought about that hook often. The morning Paul took my keys, I believed independence was hanging there. Metal. Plastic. A Buick emblem. I believed if someone could take those keys, they could take the man I had been. I was wrong. Paul was wrong too. That matters. This is not a story where the old father eventually discovers his children knew best and apologizes for being difficult. They did not have the right to take my keys. They did not have the right to decide the result before I was assessed. Concern is not ownership. But this is also not a story where passing one driving test proved I was exactly the same man I had been 20 years earlier. I wasn't. That was the harder part. At 80, I wanted everyone around me to respect my independence. What I had to learn was that independence is not the same as unchanged. My life changed. My eyesight changed. My reactions changed. My friendships changed. My marriage changed into memory. None of that made my life smaller by definition. The shrinking came when I refused to change with it. Margaret understood that before I did. She usually did. I hate giving her that much credit. My children understand something now too. Helping me does not mean replacing my decisions. They ask. I answer. Sometimes they disagree. Sometimes I am wrong. Sometimes they are. Family life continues. Last Thursday, Paul picked me up for breakfast. He was 7 minutes late. I was waiting outside. When I got in, I said, "You're late." He said, "You don't drive anymore." What does that have to do with punctuality? Nothing. Exactly. We drove to Miller's. Paul parked badly. I told him. He ignored me. I told him again. Some parts of independence are spiritual. Inside, Frank was arguing with Evelyn. Leonard was already eating. Karen had arrived before us. The old booth could not hold everyone anymore. So Miller's pushed 2 tables together. I stood there looking at them. For 37 years, I had believed Thursday breakfast meant booth 6. 3 bus depot men. 7:30. Then people died. People fell. Eyes failed. Cars were sold. Children became drivers. Strangers became friends. The booth became 2 tables. And somehow Thursday breakfast survived. Not because we preserved it. Because we let it change. I sat down. Paul pulled out the chair beside me. Not for me. For himself. Good. He had learned. The waitress poured coffee. Frank complained about the price. Evelyn told him he had been complaining about the price since coffee cost 75 cents. Leonard stole toast from my plate. Karen told me I needed new shoes. Paul agreed. I threatened to leave. Nobody believed me. I looked around the table. Then thought of Margaret. Useful changes shape, Harold. For most of my life, being useful meant taking people somewhere. Driving the bus. Driving the children. Driving Margaret. Driving my friends. Now sometimes somebody takes me. And when we arrive, I am still me. That sounds obvious. At 81, it took me a while. Growing older is full of moments when the world quietly asks you to surrender something. A name you cannot remember. A staircase you no longer trust. A jar you cannot open. A journey you decide someone else should drive. The fear is that if you surrender enough little things, eventually there will be nothing left that belongs to you. I know that fear. I lived inside it. But I was wrong about what belonged to me. The car did not. The ability to do every task alone did not. Youth certainly did not. My choices belong to me. My voice belongs to me. The right to be asked belongs to me. And the people around my table belong with me, not to me. That is different. My son took my keys because he was afraid. I demanded them back because I was afraid too. His fear said, "If Dad changes, I might lose him." Mine said, "If I change, I might lose myself." Both fears were wrong. Change came anyway. I am still here. And next Thursday at 7:30, whether by bus, car, somebody's daughter, somebody's son or one of those ridiculous ride services, I will be at breakfast. Probably telling Paul how to park. Margaret would expect nothing less.